Olá e bem-vindos ao Unreleased, o podcast de investigação em design. Este podcast existe para ajudar a mapear, difundir e promover a investigação em design. O podcast Unreleased é-lhe oferecido pela UIAD, Universidade Europeia e UNIDCOM. Esta entrevista foi gravada no Estúdio 4 do UIAD, inserida nas atividades do Centro de Investigação UNIDCOM. Para saber mais, por favor visite o site unreleased.unidcom-iad.pt.
Our podcast today's guest is Professor Dr. Christian Becker-Asano, known for his contributions in the scientific community in the fields of AI, HMI, with research interests that span across several key thematics, including effective computing, Android science, and multi-agent systems. Welcome to UNIDCOM's Unreleased podcast. Hope you enjoy. For starters, let me introduce myself. I'm Gonçalo Pires, Creative Executive Officer of Vision Onset, and I'm also a lecturer here at UIAD, and I'm the host of this podcast. Let me start by introducing my colleague in PhD of Digital Games Development, which is André Miraldo. Let me read something because he is the ASO and Monetization Specialist at Infinity Games. An enthusiastic Japanese culture fan, and also my PhD colleague, as I already told you. And last but not least, our honorable guest, Dr. Christian Becker-Asano, hello, which is a full professor for artificial intelligence and human-machine interaction at Media University in Stuttgart, Germany, with a PhD in computer science and a postdoc in robotics. I know you have an extensive curriculum, but just for starters, let's keep it short. He's also in the industry. He's been in the industry for several years. Now he's being the CTO and co-founder of Digita Consulting. It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's start. André.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here, and it seems that I'm not the only enthusiastic for Japanese culture in the room, but to leave that to a lighter note, I'll start off to talk about a little bit about HRI. Like, how does one get into HRI? How do you feel the need to make this interaction more interesting even, and less, let's say, stiff as it has been in the past?
Yeah, I guess most of us now here are listening to this podcast and don't see us. But I see you and I see both of you and I see how you gesture and how you use eye gaze to control the conversation flow. And that was what was very interesting to me as well. So if you have something that is visually there, even on the screen or in reality as a robot, then it becomes very interesting to see how the non-verbal aspects of communication play into the whole communication game. And that's why I was interested in it.
Wow. So would you think that's one of the key challenges for the HCI interaction, like to try to replicate what happens in a normal conversation to what goes on the computer screen? And not only computer screens, but other types of digital media, like you could have just a sound playing on, and that would not be able to reproduce the gestures and the flow of voice that we're doing. But it should be considered that there's some kind of computer and human interaction as well, because that's a computer that's transmitting the sound as well in that environment.
Yeah, traditionally we had the computer-human interaction on a screen simply, right? You had a mouse pointer you could click, so it was quite clear how you could design. Actually, it took a lot of research, but at some point we have Windows and operating systems which present you with the same kind of themes for buttons and sliders and all that stuff, and that's also what we teach at the university. But when the Alexas and Siris came into play, it was a new way of interacting. And maybe you know that, for example, Alexa has this Alexa dot, where at least while it's listening, there's a little blue circle, I think, blue light going around, and then at some point it goes to the direction where the voice comes from, so it gives you some feedback that it's really listening to you. Mm-hmm. And that's something that they also pushed into the market, and it's somehow successful. And maybe in the future we will have something more robotic with a face that can take a look at you and turn the head. And that's what I'm interested in to do research on.
Wow, that's really interesting for sure. Like the fact that even if it's not that's simulating a human action, just a light or some kind of sense could perfectly be used as a reminder that you're interacting with a software, not with a real person behind the object. When I was in China last year, I had the same experience with their version of Alexa, which is Xiaotu, if I'm not mistaken, and it was also really interesting because it addressed you in a very simple way. With like, when you would make a request, it would just respond like, "Huh, okay," like very natural, and that's something that I think it's really core in HCI. And from your perspective, what do you think is the core that makes your design in HCI stand out? Like, what's the main core effective HRI design?
Well, I wouldn't say it's the most effective HRI design. I just like to concentrate on very realistic robotic systems that really can be mistaken for a human, right? So really Android robots. And they have skin and hair, and some people say it's the uncanny valley effect, so they feel a bit threatened by this technology, or even strange and awkward when you're standing in front of it. But I actually give the people in Stuttgart, my hometown now, the chance to directly interact with these robots, and it's much better and much easier to interact with them and to evaluate these systems when you have a direct face-to-face interaction rather than watching just a video.
Yeah, so picking up from that, and because you mentioned the uncanny valley, do you believe that the uncanny valley is more, you feel the uncanny valley more closely when you're watching it on the screen rather than interacting with the robot itself? Do you feel that that's a thing, or it's just a preconceived notion?
Yeah, it's not only my belief, it's something that the researchers found out now, that when you watch these robots, it doesn't need to be always just very realistic robot, but when you watch humanoid robots with a face and you watch them on a video, it's a different aspect or a different feeling as if you are live interacting with them. It's not always better to interact live with them, because you might feel really threatened, because if it raises the hand and it can touch you, it's of course something different as if you're just watching a video.
For sure.
But by changing the 3D aspect, that you really take a look from both sides, you have more the feeling that this thing is really there and has a kind of soul of itself, or actually, soul is maybe a big word, but something that you interpret into this system easily because it looks so real.
Wow, thank you. And
Christian, just sorry to interrupt, just about the uncanny valley, we were studying, already told you about sounds. Don't you think that having sounds in the robots, or actual voices in the robots, conversations, you can surpass that uncanny valley? Imagine
it's definitely very, very important, but you can make many mistakes by putting sounds into the robot. For example, I tried out laughter in the past and in Japan, and maybe I didn't do well enough. People were laughing at it and were not. I mean, it's good that they start laughing when the robot is laughing, but in that situation, they shouldn't have laughed. They should have felt a bit concerned about what's happening, and it didn't work out so well. So you have to do it right, and that's very tricky, because audio signals and fusing them is very difficult, actually.
Maybe it's easier to put sounds and all those kinds of things into robots which are not humanoids, which are not
because you don't expect so much of them if you see them.
We've seen that paper, the laughing, and you have like lots of laughings, different kinds of laughings into the same robot.
Yeah, right. So to try out, it's just a humanoid robot, not with hair and skin, but and then two versions of this robot, and I tried out systematically to see what kind of laughter fits well in a certain situation where there's the word Ariehen inside. So like unbelievable. Like the robot says unbelievable.
There is no possibility.
Right.
So continuing on that thread of the uncanny valley, because I think it's a topic that sometimes people aren't even aware, and I'm not talking about someone that deals with human-robot interaction on a daily basis, but the general crowd isn't aware of the uncanny valley. Do you feel like the valley is flattening, or that we are flattening for the wider audience nowadays in such a way that it will become a relic of the past?
Well, maybe I need to explain a bit what the uncanny valley refers to. So it's an X and Y axis, where on the X-axis you have the realism of the design of the robot, from industrial robot on the left side to like Westworld robots. Maybe you know the HCO series,
Yes.
Westworld. So very realistic, and you would assume that if the robot is indistinguishable from a human by how it is acting, how it is speaking, then you would feel very, very familiar, very, very close to it, and it would be very natural to interact with it. But our robots right now are not that perfect. And interestingly, when you start from the left side, from the industrial robot side, a humanoid robot, you feel like, oh, it's nice. It has 2 arms, maybe looks like a little astronaut, like Asimo. And you feel more like, okay, it's closer to me. Right? So that's why that's going up a bit.
Like a C-3PO, for instance, from Star Wars.
Yeah, right.
The android that you can see has a human shape, but
Right.
not the features that you used to look to in the human.
Exactly. So you can easily see it's looking somewhere because it has 2 eyes, as we have on a certain level. Has 2 arms, it's maybe pointing somewhere. But then if it's getting more realistic, for example, if C-3PO had skin and hair, then maybe it would be a bit freaky. It would be like a zombie. Like that's the thing that you normally have in mind when you fall into the uncanny cliff, uncanny valley, actually. And I mentioned now the uncanny cliff because there's a famous paper of a colleague of mine who said maybe the uncanny valley is an uncanny cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that you cannot get out of it, right? You cannot avoid it. You fall into it and you cannot get up again. It's a rather philosophical question because, if you have ex machina robots or the robot that I mentioned before, Westworld robots,
Yes.
then it should be possible, right? If you get to that point, to have these kind of robots. The next question is why would you want to have them, but that's a different point.
Yeah.
But in theory, it should be possible, right? If the robot is really indistinguishable and can really move the hands and feet and everything, and face especially, in the way that we are using it appropriately, then it should be indistinguishable, and then on the right side and very, very nicely doing very well. And I'm not sure if we get there, but in my research, when I put the robot into the museum, only 10% of the people who were interviewed said, it felt strange. It felt somehow uncanny. Only 10% of
That's
the people
a low
were
percentage,
interviewed.
for sure.
And so it's not so uncanny, I guess, because I have such a robot in my lab.
Maybe the existence of the uncanny valley was a bit over-exaggerated, or in case we have an uncanny cliff, we'll have to find ways to fly over it because
Yeah, right.
that's definitely how. So, besides that, oh yes, Gonçalo, please.
No, it was about the uncanny valley and the C-3PO. Actually, when we were studying the social robot, I've spoke to some students and asked them, do you know Star Wars? Yeah, of course, we love the series. And I was like, oh, your generation, you do Star Wars? Okay, cool. So, what do you feel about C-3PO against R2-D2? So, oh yeah, I love R2-D2 because he's smart and do all these kinds of things and now let me ask you, what about the sound? What about the sounding? Oh, I prefer C-3PO because he looks like a human. He talks as a human. Even if he's like he or it, I don't know how to address to him, but let's call it it. Kind of dumb talking, but people and most of the students felt more empathic towards C-3PO against R2-D2. But then we did the confusion matrix and we asked, but do you prefer, in terms of cognition, do you prefer R2-D2, even if it just does the beep, 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 beep? They said, yeah, we prefer R2-D2. So for them, I feel, for me, it's the same, of course. I'm more empathic towards C-3PO other than R2-D2. But I feel it's the same. You spoke about Windows and the mouse of Doug Engelbart in the 50s, right? At that time, we cannot call it an uncanny valley, but people weren't used to use it, I feel it's the same as with robots and with the uncanny valley, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
But again, I feel that sound is truly important when you're creating robots because, again, R2-D2, C-3PO, the important thing here to have empathical robots is for you to talk and it can reach you talking also.
Now let's do a little exercise and imagine like the voices were swapped. Like C-3PO had R2-D2's voice and R2-D2's would speak like C-3PO.
That was the thing.
Would that be the optimal robot for
That's
for
another
interaction?
Study. That's the thing
exactly.
about the confusion matrix. And that
Yeah,
would be
we did
equivalent
where I was in Freiburg. We did such a. I'm not sure if I was involved, but maybe some colleague of mine did a study on a mildly humanized robot called Daryl, which looks more or less like something in between R2D2 and C3PO. And he tried to make some kind of musical voice and language, and he used the reference with R2D2. And it has been used, it has been tried out, but in order to convey meaning and intention, it's very difficult because, now it's happy, now it's sad, but what does it want, right? Does it want to pass me on the left side or on the right side? It should be easy to say that, right? I will pass on the left, and then you know what I mean, right? I don't even need to point where I want to go. But on the other hand, if I'm already, if my robot has already some head and eyes in it, I can just let it look left, as we do normally. We don't talk all the time in Lisbon now. I go to the left, you go to the right. We just look at each other's faces and heads, and we know, and we can find out what kind of intention the other person has. If the other person saw me, then of course I can say that person will respect my privacy and not bump into me, right? In most cases, some people do. So that's how human communication also works on a non-verbal level. And that's important if a robot has a body. And if it's very human-like, you expect it to use that body in the same way as humans use it. So sometimes it's not good to let a robot really have a human body, a humanoid body, because then you have to program all the intuition, all these social signal processing into the robot as well. For me, it's nice because I like to do this as a science person, but for the application in the industry, it's very hard.
Yeah, for sure. When you think of specific instances, like you're on a narrow path, you have someone coming up against you, and just with the look of an eye, you can tell that person that you're going to screw a little bit to the left, so he can go to the right, and then you can both go at the same time. And to grasp the amount of interactions and thought processing a robot would have to do to signalize that, and to be sure that the person wouldn't go against his path, would be something truly complicated.
It has been done with these kind of robots, especially with robots on wheels. There's lots of research in this area, and it's not really solved because every design of a robot needs a different kind of signaling. So sometimes it's simply blinkers, like intention.
Like a car.
like a car has. Sometimes an LED stripe that can do something like Alexa does, as I said before. And sometimes it's really some head and eyes and looking somewhere. But did you notice that when you really are in a hurry in Lisbon, you can just look up and avoid eye contact? People will go away because you can see like in the edge of your eye, you can see that people look at you, and then you can just not look back, and then you are in the strong position to just go through because they are afraid that he doesn't see me, so I have to go away.
Christian, we Portuguese cannot do that because you're German and you're tall, so everybody knows. No, let him pass.
Nah, I'm not always doing that. I'm not that kind of person.
I think I'm the only one that can complain in this room about that. You are also pretty tall for a Portuguese, Gonçalo. But I might add that the opposite also works. Like, I'm not very tall, so if I mind my own business, look slightly down, I also can go...
Avoiding eye contact. It doesn't mean you need to be very tall. Yeah.
But avoiding eye contact is something that actually... Doesn't it sometimes make you feel, less part of the world? And
Yeah, of course. On the other hand, if you want to have a robot being accepted in this world, it should not always stare at you. That's the other effect. If you really stick to eye contact, it's also not correct. Very difficult to find the right balance. And then if a robot stares at you, you might get angry with the robot. And angriness is something that's somehow detectable in the face, but not always. So it's very difficult to put emotions into play when you have a robot that is maybe also capable of expressing emotions. Right, and that's also one part of my research, because if I have a robot with a face, then I want to let it express the basic emotions in a way that it's convincing. And my students already worked on this and also did an evaluation study. And it can do it. It can do it somehow.
Nice. So now that we've spoken a bit about all these constraints and what goes in constructing a successful robot that can be integrated in society, how it has been lately for you? Which projects have you developed in the last few times that you're trying to, apply all this knowledge and all these interesting concepts and this very cyberpunkish view of society? What's hot on your head now?
Well, I was lucky that when our Android robot, which is sitting on a chair, it cannot move through the city, it cannot walk, so it's just sitting on a chair, has 2 arms and a head and a face. I was lucky that ChatGPT came out just a few months after that, so we could integrate some nice system where you can talk to the robot by a microphone and it will respond to your request using ChatGPT in the background. Also using its face, moving its mouth in a way that it's convincing, more or less convincing. My student was working on lip reading. Then we also had to decide which voice. So our robot is designed in an androgynous. Yes, sorry, that word is always escaping me. In a way that is neither male or female. At least in the first view, we would say it's difficult to tell. So we have a short hair wig and a long hair wig, and then we made even a voice that is like neither male nor female. That's another PhD student working on this aspect. And so, yeah, we are now starting with all these different single tasks that we have to put together to make it a believable character that can sit in the museum, for example, in front of you, and you can talk about life or maybe even about the context around you. And that's another tricky part, because if you know that there is a bus or a nice Mercedes car or a nice Porsche car on the left side, then you say, oh, how about the car on your right side? You say to the robot, because it's sitting opposing you. The robot has no idea about what's around it, right? So then you need object recognition in the camera of the eye of the robot. And so there are many other tasks which are now to be tackled. And for that, of course, I invite all the students of the world to join the lab and to work with me and with us, with the PhD students, to do this kind of research.
Christian, about the voice modulation, what have you did some kind of research, or how do you came up with that modulated voice?
My PhD student, Johanna Kuch, she studied audiovisual media. She came from that field, and then she did her master's in computer science. And in the end, she had both worlds, right? She had the audio world and she had the computer science world. And there was a paper that explained how to use a certain filter, an audio filter, to remove some frequencies out of the audio signal. And that makes the voice sound neither male nor female. And that's what she applied. And she was now applying this to not only spoken language, but also humming.
Did it sound more metallic or?
Yeah, it sounds a bit more metallic. So like my voice is very deep, right? So you can easily tell, hopefully, that I'm male. But even after using that filter, my voice sounds not so male anymore. Maybe still a bit male, but not so much. And she did an empirical study with the samples.
Cool.
And she found out that yes, people subjectively also agree that this is more neutral.
So do you believe that the fact that neither the voice nor the looks are exclusively male or female is something to take into account for the deployment of a robot to society?
The idea to aim at neither male nor female robot came from one of my professor colleagues. She's expert in digital ethics and in ethics in general. And you might consider it a bit strange that most of these robots are female, and then they are supposed to serve you, right? And they are always nice, And this is not good for our society if we think that being female means you have to be nice and serving people, right? It's a prejudice, which is not true. And we have this whole discussion at the moment about non-binary people,
of course,
about your own identity and gender and the difference. And so she convinced everyone in the university, because I wasn't the person who decided this altogether, that it would be a very nice way to treat a robot as something special, although it looks no more or less human-like, right?
Yeah.
So it's still a machine, and you should never forget that.
And the fact that you're considering it special, you can also then try to introduce this idea into society that people are allowed to be themselves and you don't have to be put a label on. And that's
Exactly.
I think that's a very healthy way of thinking. And to start out, that our differences are our biggest values, so we have to cater for them. And if we start introducing these new technologies and entities, such as social robots, with that in mind, I think that's a great progress to go through.
For sure. Again, about your PhD and your Wasabi project, there's some kind of robot underneath the curtains. I don't know, or behind the curtains in this case. But yeah, about the Wasabi project, and we're talking about social robots, of course, we feel that it's super important to have that kind of engine inside. Let me call it inside because I'm curious, okay?
Most listeners will think of sushi now, right? Because of wasabi. So to explain, in my PhD thesis, I wrote a software that is simulating emotions. Wasabi affects simulations for agents with believable interactivity. That's the acronym for Wasabi. And there was already a different architecture which was called Tabasco. So I thought maybe it's nice to have wasabi. That's why I came up with wasabi. It's a software that is also run now in some robots which you can buy. Some developers many years ago in Poland, they contacted me and they said, yeah, of course you can. I said, yes, it's open source, you can use it. And I got the confirmation that it's still running in their system to make the robots more fun. Because, for example, C3PO, as you mentioned before, he's so much fun because he's this clumsy, or it is this clumsy thing that is always making a mistake somehow and always endangering the whole situation. That seems to be very stupid, but on the other hand, it's very intelligent design. If you have something that is believable because it's clumsy, it's better than to have something that you cannot tell what it is, right? So, and the emotion simulation that I did back then was also put into a virtual character, which is now still running in the museum in close to Bielefeld in Paderborn in Germany. And it made it more fun to interact with it. Of course, I was always asked, why do you want to have a robot having emotions? Maybe you know Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the movie, where you have Marvin, this depressive or depressed robot.
Kind of.
Maybe it's fun to watch it, but if you want to live with such a robot, might be.
Oh my God!
I don't know. I actually don't know. Right? It might be fun. You know, if you can always turn it off and then turn it off again to have something entertaining in the house. Right? Who knows?
Yeah, as long as it doesn't get into your mind. Like, if you don't have depressive thoughts by yourself, that's definitely something to light up the mood. But we can continue on a little bit on this, like, for the vision for the future theme. Like, what do you think will be the next steps? Because I think we're also near the time limit. So what do you think will be the next steps to take a foothold here in
roughly half an hour?
Yeah. So we should be.
No, we're okay.
Okay.
We're not looking at the script anymore. So let it flow.
We'll just let it flow then, and after breaking the flow for a while, I'll continue. What do you think will be the next step in terms of human-computer interaction and human-robot interaction? Like, what do you see any upcoming technologies that are, besides, of course, the already mentioned ChatGPT and the Android robot? Like, what do you see that's still lacking and there's not yet a clear answer to it?
There are many things that are still lacking. And although some people would say I'm an expert, I'm not almighty or something like that. So I cannot really tell. One thing that the big companies are doing is using reinforcement learning, for example, for manual tasks. Maybe you saw that already. And scene understanding. So a large language model nowadays can also use some video streams or at least still pictures to not only get text input, but also picture input or even audio input now. And then combining this in one machine learning model that then has some kind of understanding of what is around the robot is very powerful. Because as I said, at the moment, our robot doesn't know that there's a car or something next to it. And we could just make a little hack saying, okay, on the right side is a car. We could put this into the text, but it would be much nicer to have a system that can understand this by itself. It's the holy grail of human-robot interaction, to have a robot that can walk around and sit down and then understand what the situation is like. Imagine a robot coming through here and sitting down here and understanding, okay, there are microphones and cameras, and hopefully I understand correctly that this is a place where I shouldn't talk, right? Because it shouldn't talk when it comes in. And this is something that is still an open topic. But with the machine learning that is now going on, plus the traditional AI, which we have also still, maybe we get to a point where we have very nice, specific, at the first moment, specific solutions, and that later scale into the more general context.
Wow, thanks a lot for that insight. While you were telling me that, there was one question that popped into my head, and this might be a little bit out of reach, but when you mentioned the fact that the robot doesn't acknowledge the presence of the objects nearby him, how do you think, on a long scale, will a robot deal with the concept of object permanence?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just knowing that there's an object in front of it, then turning around and forgetting completely that this object is still there, perhaps, right? Most likely, at least.
Most likely.
Is not really helpful, right? It should not always analyze the scene again and again every minute, right? It should have some permanency. And that's, of course, the level on top of it. And also remembering that this person was nicer to me, that person was not so nice to me, that's also something that it's like autobiographical memory. There has been work done on this like 20, 30 years ago, on the concepts and on the implementation of this. I even have one paper which is called misattribution of emotion, which means you can make the computational architecture in such a way that the robot will believe that it was him sitting in front of me instead of the loud noise that happened behind the robot that made me angry in the past. That's called misattribution of emotion, which is somehow scary, because why don't you want to have a deterministic system that is doing the right things and not misattributing something? But from a cognitive science perspective, it's nice to try to make a computational architecture able to do the wrong things that the human people are also doing, right? I'm not sure if I can make it clear enough.
No, I think it's pretty clear. Go ahead. I only have one more question on my side, so you can take the lead, Gonçalo.
Well, yesterday we had this conversation about in the roundtable about feelings and emotions and so forth, and actually we were speaking about not emotions, but what do you feel or what do you perceive or something, or you do something wrong and you try to do something wrong. That's pretty difficult regarding ethical considerations, right?
In Europe, we have the AI Act, I think. In Europe, we have now the AI Act, and it forbids the use of emotion recognition in products, but it's okay to use it for research or to do research on it.
But even companies collect that data, right? So
yeah, but that's, I mean, you're not allowed to pass the red light when you're a pedestrian. In Germany, most people don't. In Portugal most people do.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, if something is forbidden, doesn't mean that it's not done. But at least if it comes out, they have to pay a penalty or some fine or something. So.
Not here.
Yeah.
No, not for crossing the red light. But in case of collecting data and misusing it and using it for something that was illegal, the point for me is I can do my research on it, but in the end, our research is something that should also help the public to make new businesses, right? That's our duty in the end, because taxpayers' money. So who will pay my research on emotions if in the end there will be no use for it?
It's still very gray. It's a very gray area, I think. Yeah. It's very black box-ish. And you don't have to go as far as Germany and Portugal. For instance, in Japan, you also have the same. In Tokyo, people don't jaywalk, but in Osaka they do.
Right. It's not that Portuguese, and I don't know.
No, it was just a joke.
So special, right.
So finally, I have one question. Like, what advice would you give someone that has a lot of interest in this area? Like, if they want to pursue it, what should they care about? What should they try to understand first, and what's the process?
I got to know that. I mean, I got the feeling that HRI is done by computer scientists and roboticists, and also by psychologists very much. So it depends where you are most interested in. So study something like psychology or computer science or mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, or it's okay to start with something like that. But you need to be somehow well educated in a certain field, and then I think very soon everyone will say, yeah, come to me and work with me. We can do research together, because it's an interdisciplinary approach, HRI. You don't need to decide early on to stick to computer science. You can go with psychology first and then be open enough to think about cognitive architectures, or even cognitive science is possible. And then in the end, you can come together and do HRI. So don't be afraid to jump into it, even if you think I'm not a computer scientist or I'm not a psychologist, right? It's fine.
Nice. Thank you so much. And from my side is all. Christian-sama, 本当にありがとうございます.
Yes, it's my pleasure as well.
And I hope that I know you're going to Tokyo in a couple of weeks as well.
Yep.
And I'll be there at the same time. So I hope we can have a drink over there, or at least a coffee.
Let's meet for a beer, yes.
But yeah, I think Asahi Super Dry will be a good way to celebrate.
I don't want to advertise any kind of beer now.
Damn.
But
well,
let's
it's my
meet
personal taste. I have no affiliation, so I'm fine with that. So, Gonçalo, I pass it on to you.
You said it all. Just a big thank you to Professor Becker-Asano, and to our listeners. Thank you for tuning up to the Unreleased podcast. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and hope to see you guys again here, or who knows, I don't know.
Somewhere in the world.
In the uncanny cliff, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh,
good luck with
all
your
go there.
podcast. Good luck with your podcast, and
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Se gostou do conteúdo, por favor, subscreva o nosso podcast e siga-nos nas redes sociais. Para saber mais sobre o podcast Unreleased, por favor visite unreleased.unidcom-iad.pt e poderá encontrar todos os episódios e informações dos nossos convidados. O podcast Unreleased é resultado do trabalho dos alunos de Práticas e Cultura do Design do Programa de Doutoramento em Design do IAD, Universidade Europeia. É produzido e editado pela UNIDCOM.